So, you ever watch Trial by Fire on Netflix? That movie about a dude who got sent to death row over a house fire that may not have even been arson? Yeah, well, what if I told you that wasn't just some Hollywood drama? It was real. And it all went down in a small Texas town back in 1991. So it's December 23rd, 1991, 2 days before Christmas. We're in Corsicana, Texas, a quiet little town where nothing ever happens. Todd Willingham is a 23-year-old dad at home with his 3 daughters, 2-year-old Amber and 1-year-old twins, Carmen and Cameron. His wife, Stacy, is out running errands, probably grabbing some last-minute Christmas gifts. And then, his entire world goes up in flames. Literally. Sometime that morning, a fire breaks out inside the Willingham house, and not just a little kitchen fire. This thing spreads like it was waiting to burn the place down. Thick, black smoke, walls caving in, flames shooting through the roof. And Todd? He wakes up to the sound of Amber screaming. Now imagine this. You open your eyes and all you see is fire. You can't breathe, you can't see, your kids are trapped somewhere inside. Todd claims he tried to crawl through the house to get to them, but the flames were too intense. Eventually, he makes it to the front door and stumbles outside. And this is where things start to get weird. Todd is standing outside, watching his house turn into an inferno, and people in the neighborhood start running over. Witnesses say he was acting strange. He wasn't hysterical, wasn't screaming for help, just pacing around, almost too calm. A few neighbors even say he was more worried about his car than his kids, trying to move it away from the flames. And the moment firefighters arrive, Todd's standing in the yard in just his boxers, barely reacting as they rush inside. Now, let's be real. Grief hits people in weird ways. Some people scream, some people go into shock, some people just shut down completely. But the second firefighters get inside the house, things go from suspicious to straight up alarming. Because the fire, it spread fast. Too fast. And when investigators start looking at the burn patterns, they find some pretty sketchy stuff. Multiple points where the fire started, strange marks on the floor that look like accelerant was poured, and cracks in the windows that apparently only happen when a fire burns unnaturally hot. Translation? They think this wasn't just some tragic accident. This was arson. And since Todd is the only adult who was in the house when it started, well, guess who's suspect number 1? Now, the fire department does their full investigation, and within days, they come to a very confident conclusion. Todd Willingham set that fire on purpose. And suddenly, this isn't just a house fire, it's a triple homicide. And the motive? Well, the cops come up with one hell of a theory. They say Todd was an abusive husband, a violent guy with a mean streak, that he saw his kids as a burden, that he wanted them out of his life. And so, according to their version of events, he dumped accelerant all over the house, lit a match, and walked out, letting his daughters burn to death. But here's the thing. There's zero physical evidence that any of this is true. No history of child abuse, no proof that he bought or used any accelerants, no eyewitnesses seeing him do anything suspicious before the fire. All they have is a handful of burn marks and some neighbors who say he wasn't grieving the right way. But that doesn't matter, because in Texas, they don't play around. Less than a month after the fire, Todd Willingham is arrested and charged with capital murder. And if you think things are looking bad for him now, bro, this trial is about to be a train wreck. Hey! This story is just getting started. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more here on Talescape. So Todd Willingham is sitting in a jail cell, probably thinking this whole thing is some massive misunderstanding. Like, yeah, his house burned down. Yeah, it looked suspicious, but surely someone's going to step in and say, hey, maybe we should actually prove he did this before we fry the guy. Yeah. No, because when this case goes to trial in 1992, the state of Texas does not come to play. From day one, the prosecution builds their entire case on one thing, the fire investigation. And according to their experts, this wasn't just any house fire. This was planned. They bring in investigators who go all in on the burn patterns, saying things like, this was a textbook arson fire. They point to the floor char marks, saying they prove an accelerant was poured. They talk about how the windows had cracked in a way that only happens in a deliberately set blaze. And to the jury, it all sounds airtight. But science? Yeah, science is not in the courtroom that day, because fire investigation in the early 90s, basically just a bunch of dudes with mustaches eyeballing burn marks and guessing. But the jury doesn't know that. And Todd's defense, yeah, they're not doing a great job pushing back on any of this. And then comes the real problem, the character assassination. Prosecutors know that juries don't just convict people on science, they convict people when they don't like them. And Todd, he's a perfect target. He's covered in tattoos, has a criminal record for non-violent stuff, but still, and comes off as cocky. And his personality in court, let's just say he doesn't exactly win them over. Then the state pulls their ace card, a jailhouse informant named Johnny Webb. Now, if you don't know how jailhouse snitches work, let me break it down for you. These guys get busted for something, and then, magically, they end up in a cell with the most high-profile suspect in the system. And somehow, within days, that suspect just happens to confess their whole crime to them. And that's exactly what Webb claims happened. He gets on the stand and says that while they were locked up together, Todd straight up admitted to setting the fire. That he said his kids were in the way and that he had no remorse. The jury eats it up. Now, at this point, Todd's defense should be tearing this guy apart. But instead, they barely put up a fight. They don't question his credibility, don't point out that informants lie all the time for reduced sentences, don't even push back on the fact that literally nothing he says is backed up by evidence. And then, the final nail in the coffin. The prosecution tells the jury that Todd Willingham is a monster, that he didn't just commit arson, he murdered his children in cold blood. And the jury, they don't take long. After barely an hour of deliberation, they come back with the verdict: guilty. And Texas, they don't do second chances. The judge sentences him to death. Todd Willingham is officially a dead man walking. And if he thought this nightmare was bad so far, bro, it's about to get so much worse. So Todd Willingham is now sitting on death row, locked in a tiny concrete cell, waiting to be executed for a crime he swears he didn't commit. And for the first few years, it's looking real bad. Appeals? Rejected. New evidence? Nope. Texas is not backing down. But then, years later, something happens, and it's the kind of thing that should have saved his life. See, while Todd is rotting away in prison, forensic science is evolving. Real fire experts are starting to debunk a lot of the old-school fire investigation techniques that put people away in the 80s and 90s. And when one of them, Dr. Gerald Hurst, hears about Todd's case, he decides to take a closer look. And what he finds? It's game over for the original investigation. Hurst analyzes the burn patterns, the so-called accelerant evidence, and the heat damage. And his conclusion? There is zero proof this fire was arson. The pore patterns on the floor? That's just how fire naturally burns in an enclosed space. The cracked windows? Caused by extreme heat, not accelerants. The multiple points of origin? Actually the result of something called flashover, where everything in a room ignites at once because of built-up heat. In other words, the fire investigators who testified at Todd's trial? Yeah, they had no idea what they were talking about. And here's the most horrifying part. If this fire had happened just a few years later, after forensic science caught up, Todd never would have been convicted. Hell, he probably never even would have been arrested. So his defense team rushes to get this new evidence in front of Texas officials, hoping for a last-minute appeal. And for a moment, it looks like they might actually stop the execution. The case gets sent to the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, and the governor at the time, Rick Perry, has the power to step in. But does he? Nope. On February 17, 2004, Todd Willingham is led into the execution chamber. His final words? He tells his family he loves them. Then he turns to the people responsible for putting him there and says, "I am an innocent man. This execution is taking place despite the fact that I am innocent." Minutes later, he's gone. And you'd think that would be the end of it, right? Case closed? Nope. Because after Todd's execution, the story blows up. More experts start coming forward saying the same thing. This fire wasn't arson. The state of Texas just executed a man based on bad science. And how does Texas react? Yeah, not well. In 2009, the Texas Forensic Science Commission starts digging into the case, and right before they're supposed to present their findings, Governor Rick Perry replaces several of the board members, almost like they didn't want the truth coming out. So at the end of the day, did Texas execute an innocent man? Well, based on modern fire science, yeah. And the scariest part? Todd's case isn't the only one. Because if the system can fail this badly once, how many other innocent people are sitting on death row right now? Thanks for tuning in to Talescape. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories where ambition meets chaos, and sometimes history.